Hey everyone, this is Mr. Michelson one more time. You should have a book by now, I hope. Make sure your name is on the inside cover. That way we know this is your book. I'm going to scan your books next time just to make sure they're in the system and we know whose is whose. But please don't lose them between now and next class. So as you crack your books open, just kind of follow along with me here. And I want to just kind of get you into things. You see the table of contents page right here. You can see how many chapters there are. Pretty typical, nothing special there. Next page is a page about Mark Twain. If you want more information about who he was, a little 2-page biography here. And then there's a timeline of his life. So you can see when he was born in 1835, when Halley's Comet appeared on the same day. You can also see when The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was published in 1876, and he died in 1910, again when Halley's Comet appeared in the sky. So just a little timeline of his life there. And then it gets into some historical context of the novel, some topics that might be interesting. You can feel free to read all these on your own as well. What was Tom Sawyer's Missouri like? What's racism and racism language's role in this time period and in this book? Go ahead and look at that on your own time. We might come back to some of that later. There's also a list of major characters, so that's handy. And then a list of minor characters as well, which might be even more handy as we get into this book. We really like this text, this specific text of Tom Sawyer, because it has a lot of resources, which I want to kind of point out to you as we keep cracking them open here. This is where I want you now, this sort of sketch of our setting. I'll read this to you. It says, St. Petersburg is a fictional creation of Mark Twain, but it is representative of many small towns that dotted the shores of the Mississippi River in the 1840s and 1850s. While boats moved up and down the river, townspeople tended to their homes, farms, and gardens, attended church, and sent their children to school. Travel was often by horse or foot. The pace of life was slower, but as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer shows, there was plenty of amusement to be had in a sleepy little river town. So this page just kind of gets us into thinking a little bit about the setting of this book. The next page is a bunch of quotations from Mark Twain. He's a very quotable person. He's got quotes on golf and on humans and on obedience and parents and school. Lots of quotable things from Mark Twain. So feel free to check those out on your own time as well. And then we've got page 1, really, of the preface of the novel. Let me just read this to you as well. Follow along. Most of the adventures recorded in this book really occurred. 1 or 2 were experiences of my own. The rest, those of boys who were schoolmates of mine. Huck Finn is drawn from life. Tom Sawyer also, but not from an individual. He is the combination of the characteristics of 3 boys whom I knew, and therefore belongs to the composite order of architecture. The odd superstitions touched upon were all prevalent among children and slaves in the West at the period of this story, that is to say 30 or 40 years ago. Although my book is intended mainly for the entertainment of boys and girls, I hope it will not be shunned by men and women on that account. For part of my plan has been to try to pleasantly remind adults of what they once were themselves, and of how they felt and thought and talked, and what queer enterprises they sometimes engaged in. The author, Hartford, 1876. So he wrote this when he published this book as sort of an introduction. Here's kind of why I wrote it. Here's a little bit about how it was created. And you might have noticed that there's some different things going on this page, and I really just wanted to read this to point this out. Again, we really like this version of the text because it's got a lot going on to help you. And, Treasure Island didn't have so much of that going on in the text we had. So you notice that word queer had a little number 1 by it, and that word might mean different things to us in 2019. These words with numbers by them will help give us some definition of words we might not be familiar with in our modern vocabulary. So that word just means strange, you can see on the bottom of the page. Also, we've got words for everyday use on the bottom of the page. You're going to see this on pretty much every page of this story. It's just to focus on some vocab might be a good thing as you read one of these classic novels. And then also there was a question on the side. You'll see a lot of these questions in the margins of the text. Feel free to use those. Feel free to get those in your brain to think about as you're reading. It might help you to give some context to what you're reading, or to help you kind of think through some of the chapters that you're reading for this book. So use those resources. You're going to see them on every page, including in chapter 1, which is where you're going to get started. You see on the top it says chapter 1, and then there's a lot of little phrases. You, Tom, Polly decides upon her duty, different sort of things that actually are going to happen in this book. So these are always kind of a nice way to think about what you've read, maybe to look back on what was important in each chapter, and they'll make more sense once you've read the chapter, I think. So with that, you're going to get reading here today. And you may want to check out the pacing map for this unit. You can kind of see where we're headed with the pacing of our reading in the book. There's also a couple of resources on the bottom of that pacing map, including a digital version of the text and some audio versions of the text. So feel free to use those as you're getting started reading. Through chapter 8 for next time. I'll be quiet and let you get reading. Thanks.